Hey there, this is Angela Rasmus, and welcome to episode 56 of the Your Next Chapter podcast. Thanks so much for spending your time here with me today. Now, before I get started and introduce you to this week's awesome guest, I'd like to ask a wee favour of you, please. Now, as a podcaster, a business mentor, a woman who runs masterminds, and lots of other things as well, I understand the importance of understanding you. For me to be able to create resources, experiences, to bring on guests, topics, interviews that are really helpful to you, that'll help you move further along this path into your next chapter, I need to get under the hood just a little bit more. Now, I've typically found that people who are in my world are at three different levels of development, so to speak. You might be a discoverer, you might be a deepener, or you might be an expander. Now, to help me understand which of these categories that you fall into, and therefore to help me create that content that will be most viable for you, I put together a wee, quick, small survey, and I would love your assistance by taking probably about 3 minutes to complete this for me. All you need to do is go to angelarasmus.com/survey, and then you'll see a link there that takes you through to answer these wee questions for me. Now, I know that will take a wee bit of your time, but I will be extremely grateful and make sure that what I'm creating going forward is far even more supportive for you than it has been already. So thanks in anticipation of you helping me out there. And then let's talk about who we're talking with this week. Well, Nikki Smith is a psychologist and also a career coach and a strengths finder. But one of the things that Nikki and I talk about today is this awesome concept that she created, which is that of mini experiments. Now, this is incredibly relevant when it comes to where you may be at in your next chapter now. You know, next chapters are all about stepping into new things. It's about becoming more of the person you're supposed to be, creating more of the business that you're supposed to be doing, that one that's really aligned with your strengths. But sometimes stepping into those new roles can be quite challenging. And we can sometimes have naysayers in our environment who aren't really encouraging us to, inverted commas, take those risks. Well, that's where the mini experiments concept that Nikki has created comes in. There's actually 3 levels to mini experiments. It's taking things just for an hour, then going to the next level and taking them for a few hours, and then going to the next level and really jumping in boots and all and testing something out for up to 12 months. Now, I don't want to give away everything that Nikki reveals in this episode because it's really juicy, and I'm sure that you'll find it fascinating, and it will encourage you to extend your creativity and to test out these new experiences in your own next chapters. Nikki also has some fabulous resources to share with you and some great offers which are on the podcast page. So if you're listening to this within the app, just pop over to angelarasmus.com/56, that's number 5, number 6, and you'll be able to read all about them. But let's move in, let's dive forward, let's find out how mini experiments can really help you blossom, bloom, and flourish in your next chapter. I hope you really enjoy the episode, and I'll talk with you again very soon. Inspiration, clarity, confidence, and wholehearted business strategy. Welcome to Your Next Chapter, the podcast especially for women in their 40s and beyond who know that business and personal development go hand in hand. Tune in each week for marketing, mindset, and personal growth strategies, along with inspiring stories from women around the world who are creating new businesses and lives that are personally fulfilling and financially rewarding. If you're looking to create a business and life you love, you're in great company. Let's find out what will unfold in your next chapter. I'm your host, Angela Rasmus, and I'm so delighted that you're here.
My next chapter unfolded in a series of steps, I would say. So my last role in corporate, the last 2 roles in corporate was assessing and developing staff across different sectors here and in the UK. And then I actually started thinking, I do love this work, but it's 12 to 14 hour days. What could I do that would be a bit more family friendly, because I did want to start a family. And I moved across to career redundancy transition coaching, because there I was able to support people over a longer period of time, and also work things like more like a 6 to 8 hour day. And that was absolutely an experiment. I wasn't convinced I would love it, but I did want to try something that was more family friendly. And it turns out that I did love it. I loved it a lot. Then through the next chapter was I did feel a bit frustrated. I felt working for these companies that I could help people get a realistic but positive next chapter for them, having been made redundant, but I wasn't given enough time to help them realise what their ideal scenario was and to see how close we could get to that. So I was really inspired to actually go out on my own and conduct a mini experiment for a year to see, could I do this for myself? Could I start my own career coaching business and help people uncover their ideal scenario, something that matched their strengths, their interests, their lifestyle needs, and whether that was to become an employee or a business owner, and really support and guide and cheerlead this person to see how close to that reality we could get. So I gave myself a year to test it out, and honestly I was only working on that business potentially 3 hours a week, because by that stage I had 2 babies. By that stage, a 3-year-old and a 6-month-old or something. And over that year, I really did get enough evidence that this was the way to go for me. And so that became what is now my primary business.
I love that story, and I love that feeling. And I hear this so often with people who decide to test out, to step into their next chapter. There's that real desire for contribution and that recognition that perhaps what I'm doing now, I mean, it ticks a lot of boxes, but something isn't quite adding up, and I want to go deeper, or I want to put more of me into my work. And it sounds as though that was what happened with you. You were already in a sector where you were making a difference, but there was more potential there. How does it feel now that you've done that experiment, recognize that possibility has blossomed for you? How are you feeling in your work today?
So it truly feels incredible. I think, in that first year there was fun, but a lot of uncertainty. But I'm 4 years on. Yeah, but I'm 4 years on now, and I do feel really proud of it. It is, when I'm doing the actual coaching, it's quite exhilarating. And I'm really, really happy, very happy and fulfilled.
No, it was interesting. It was great to hear that part. But it was interesting, and I'd love everyone to really hear what you said before. When you were beginning this business, there was only 3 or 4 hours a week that you're actually focusing on it, because you had a full life. You had other things that you needed to juggle and take care of when it came to your small children. And there's sometimes, I think, a tendency for people to feel that I've got to go from 0 to 100. If I haven't, ticked all the boxes and made this business a success in the first 6 months, then, it's all over. But we can start small, can't we, and build up from there. What do you see as the advantage in allowing yourself to start small and build, as opposed to putting those pretty high expectations on yourself?
I think the advantages are huge, Angela. I really do. And in fact, I'd say I'd probably say all my clients end up doing their transition this way, or 9 out of 10. So I might even link it back to mini experiments at this point. For myself, and my clients going through that transition, I'd love to involve the concept of mini experiments. So a mini experiment means you're going to test something out, and you're going to chunk it down into something that's manageable. You're going to play with it. You're going to look for evidence, before, during, and after you experience something. Is this something you want to do more of? And you're looking for proof, and you're applying it more of a curious mind, rather than looking for success as being that definition of success, that true success. And what I find is that for me and my clients, I think you have less self-worth wrapped up in it. So because you're acting like a scientist looking for evidence, then that's the whole purpose. It's not whether you're worthy or you're successful or you're good enough. So that's one of the big advantages, for sure. And I think I think what happens when you put all your eggs in one basket, if you put so much pressure on this one business or one project or one idea being it, then you just put so much pressure on yourself and it becomes less fun. And I think potentially you assess it incorrectly. You know, you might pull the pin earlier than actually you might have been really close to it becoming successful.
I love that idea of considering ourselves to be scientists and looking for evidence rather than tipping into that evaluation of our worth or whether or not we're good enough. That has a completely different energy about it, which really, I know one of my terrible tendencies, if I can be so judgmental in the past, and I still fall into this, is that go hard or go home sort of philosophy. It's like, you're either going to do this at 100 miles an hour and at 100% or don't bother. And that's not a useful approach to life. So this idea of testing it out, chunking it down, playing with it, having a curious mind, I find that, you know, extremely, it's like giving yourself permission to explore, because I've often found that our next chapters in particular, it's not as though we get this 9 times out of 10, this instant download. Here it is. This is the thing that you are going to be enamored with for the rest of your life, and off we go. It comes like we uncover it, you know, as we move forward and try different things. It's when you almost get that joy jolt. Oh, this feels good. And so if we're allowing ourselves to play, then I think we'd be much more open to the joy jolts and follow those.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's likely to change, isn't it, Angela? Like whatever we set out to do, it's likely to change and pivot. And if we're really married to a concept and putting pressure on yourself, exactly that, we're less likely to hear the hints or see the signs or to hear another problem we want to solve from a client. And we're likely to ignore those indicators unless, we're applying curiosity and a more playful state. And, you know, there's all that science around, can we get into that flow state? And I think, again, by being curious and playful, we're more likely to get into that flow, which is what you were touching on as well.
And this, I love this idea as a sort of mini experiment. So, and I know this is something that you work with a lot with your clients, and as you said, that testing out stage, but give me some other examples of how we could use mini experiments in our life. I'm intrigued.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite topics, so I'm very happy to do that. So first of all, I'm going to talk a little bit about the framework. So when I think of mini experiments, I think of them in 3 levels. So the first one is a micro experiment. And with that one, you're simply going to play or try something out for an hour. The next level, level 2, is the mini experiment, where you're going to connect or try something out for 3 to 15 hours over 1 to 3 months. And then level 3 is the year-long experiment. So again, you're going to test or connect with something over a year, and it might be as simple as an hour a week or a day a month. That you're going to explore that over a year. So I'll give you some examples. So I'll give you an example of myself and a client. For the micro experiment, I think it was about 2 years ago, I committed to just trying surfing again for an hour. I hadn't actually surfed since I'd had my children, and it really did feel like a tough thing to come back to. And I thought, well, I'll just book in for a lesson and have a go for an hour. For my clients, when they're looking for their next career move, oftentimes they're craving some creativity or some more meaning. So a micro experiment for them, for some examples, are a drawing class, a photography class, researching an interior design course, reading some leadership research, where they simply connect with something new for 1 hour. And what I'm asking them to do is to take notice of how they feel before, during, and after that process. And if the feelings are positive for 2 out of 3 of those timings, then that's enough evidence to keep going. With the mini experiment. Oh, you go.
I'm just like, my brain is popping. I often talk about popcorn brain, and this one's definitely got me going. That idea of how do you feel before, during, and after, that giving you like a bit of a Richter scale to measure it on. I love that idea that if we're craving creativity or meaning, we don't have to go and commit to, a year-long sabbatical, on a doing meditation on a rock somewhere, we can just go take one class. Just go take one class. You don't have to change your life. You can just explore. That's exciting. I can think of lots of things I could try out there. Cool. Okay.
Yeah, excellent. Maybe you can share with us at the end which ones you're going to try.
Okay.
And I'll look often, I don't know about you, Angela, with your clients, but often clients come to me, they are quite hardcore achievers. So they are people who have, So this micro experiment can feel a bit strange if you're an achiever who likes a lot of progress and, kind of high rate of activity. But I have to say it's a really worthwhile experiment because you will actually try things that you probably wouldn't if you were committing to for a longer period of time.
Yeah, that's the big one, and that's as I was saying before about that old tendency to go hard or go home. I'll just use the gym as an example because I play with that idea. But I don't have to join for a year and commit to going to classes every single day. Why not just go down and try one? That's what I've done in this new area that I've moved to. There's one down the road where I liked the look of it, and rather than go into my old guilt and go hard or go home philosophy, I just went down and took one class just to see what it felt like. But now I've got that framework that you just gave. How did you feel before, during, and after? It definitely ticked 2 out of the 3 boxes. So let's keep going.
Yeah. And can you see how that's helpful too to keep you motivated? Because often the positive emotions are for the during and the after, but not the before. So we just need to remind ourselves when we face it again, we probably will feel a bit of resistance or negative emotions before, but we're likely to feel positive during and after because of that experience before.
Yeah, because I guess with that before piece, there could be a little bit of trepidation. There could be some negative self-talk. There could be things that don't set you up, inverted commas, for success. But I love that distinction of you can hold those feelings up and compare them to the during and after, and recognize when you look at the scales, the good feeling outrode the bad feeling. And conversely, if you really hated it and afterwards wished you'd never gone, then that gives you feedback as well. And let's go to the next mini experiment. Now, that's brilliant. Thank you.
Oh, welcome. Perfect. So the next level 2, is the mini experiment, which is trying something for 3 to 15 hours over 1 to 3 months. So 2 examples for me are trying a podcast. So I actually committed to just recording one podcast interview and publishing it to test it out. And that's what I announced to my community and my family and anyone who was interested, because I wanted to test it out. It actually wasn't good timing for me to start that project. And really, a best friend of my husband was saying, please don't. But I said, I actually need to do this. I need to test it out. It's calling me. And by just doing a mini experiment, I kept it contained and felt like, yes, I could do this in the next month. And then I'll look for the evidence for whether I want to do more of this. And another mini experiment was doing videos. And I really thought once I was on the podcast journey that was enough for me. And I'm really happy there. I feel really comfortable. But I've had a few little signs out in the universe that I needed to try video. So once again, so that I wouldn't freak myself out, I actually contained it to 3 videos, published them in a private Facebook group of my clients, and again, look for evidence before, during, and after. And that made it manageable for me. So I didn't actually get in my own way. I got out of my own way and actually made it happen.
I think there is one of the most important points, that when we commit to a mini experiment, as you're saying, when it's contained, when it has a definitive start and end, that allows you to commit to it because it's not too big a deal. It's not too big a chunk. So that point you made about getting out of your own way is I think, the core strength of this concept. Because if it doesn't work, if it doesn't feel right, as you said with the podcast, it wasn't the right time. But I guess your feelings of how it felt when you were actually doing it was indication that you might do it again. But in this case, you didn't announce, well, I'm going to do a podcast and there'll be an episode every week from now on. And so put that pressure on yourself or that expectation in your audience. You communicated that it was a test. And that's perfect. I think anyone listening who have you been thinking of trying something, I mean, let's pick hang gliding, okay? I did hang gliding when I was a lot younger back in New Zealand, and as I've continued on in life, I've often thought about how much fun it would be to actually pursue it, believe it or not, as a sport. But when I think of what's actually involved in doing hang gliding and the equipment and the time and everything, it's always too big. But if I mini experimented and just committed to one flight, tandem flight, that could be enough to see whether or not I can recapture that feeling I had quite a few years ago. So it's giving that permission. I can get out of my own way because I'm only committing to a morsel rather than a banquet.
Exactly. And I'm also thinking, Angela, you mentioned some people listening in might be on the edge of their next chapter.
Yes.
So I can give some examples of what clients are doing to explore that part of the transition. So, we've uncovered some really fascinating ideas. And again, they're just trying that morsel, like Angela said. So they're trying things like enrolling in a shoemaking course, enrolling in a 12-hour interior design course, and they're piloting we've got one client piloting speaking coaching, performance coaching, and the first pilot is 3 hours with one client. So just starting small.
Yeah, that's great. Piloting, I like that concept. So it's the pilot program. Yeah, and you're absolutely right. There's a lot of women listening who do stand on the edge. I call them discoverers. Like they're discovering what their next chapter is, what it's going to entail. And I was just at a networking event earlier this morning, and there was a woman there speaking about, I could do this or this or this. Which path do I go down, with that philosophy of, well, I've got to put all my energy and all my attention or all my efforts, I've got to choose one. Well, actually, next time I see her, I'm going to suggest that she listens into this and conducts a little mini experiment on each of them. And then it has that scientific perspective of how does it feel? I think that's a brilliant idea for people who are wanting to test something out rather than, fully commit, boots and all. Shoemaking.
Exactly.
Shoemaking.
Yes.
Love it.
Yeah, she's got, I think she's got big feet and she's frustrated with the range of shoes out there. So she thought, what if I investigate solving that problem? Yeah.
I love it. That's pure marketing there in action. Finding the need, seeing that the need's not being met, and therefore meeting the need yourself. That's perfect. So how about this year-long experiment? Let's talk about that version.
Absolutely. So the year-long one, for me, I've done quite a few of these. The first one was completely actually unintentional. I was heartbroken. I was running around the tan every second day and it wasn't doing anything for me. And my brother suggested I get back into music. And I thought, well, I'll find a singing teacher. I think that's a really good idea. And I found the most brilliant singing teacher who mentored me to conduct 8 mini experiments. And at the end of that, which was probably closer to 18 months, I had paid singing gigs. And when I went to her, I didn't intend to actually perform live, let alone form a band or get paid singing gigs. But that's what happened with chunking it down and just facing the next mini experiment without even looking beyond it. So that was a really powerful experience, and that's really what formed me into working with people this way. Another year-long experiment was my husband wanted to move to the country, and I was not convinced. But as I said, I've become a serial mini experimenter. I said, well, look, I can do anything for 12 months, so let's do it. And by looking at just 12 months, we actually made the decision and moved 6 weeks later. So we acted a lot more quickly than I think if we were doing a permanent move. And also I felt like I had an exit door if I needed it. And within 3 months, I was convinced it was the right move. But I really needed, again, to just know that it was an experiment, that we were going to make sure that it worked for both of us. And some examples for clients are, I've got a client who's just about to take his family around Australia for 12 months. So that's a big year-long experiment. And also another client who decided she would try nutrition consults over a year. She is passionate about it, but she's not convinced this is for her, but there's enough evidence to commit to it for a year in a clinic. And I've got another client who has 2 streams to her business, and she's wondering about letting go of one of the streams, but actually she's decided to collaborate with someone else and give it another 12 months to see if this is right for her.
Yeah, there's great examples, and I think what I'm hearing is that when you let go of the expectation of how it should be, and when you stay open, and you can allow yourself to do that because you've got that parameter on it. It's only for 12 months. As you said, I could do anything for 12 months. And it seems that takes away some of the chains. You know, that old saying of you've only got to take the next step. You don't need to see the whole staircase. I mean, that's what it feels like when you're describing this, that you can give yourself that permission to try something that you might not otherwise do because it's got an end date. You can extend that end date if the experiment was a success, but those shoulds are taken away. It's not quite so prescriptive or conscriptive. It's neither of those things. I guess the other thing that comes up when I'm hearing you, Nikki, is I think sometimes we can have misbeliefs about what's possible for us and about what's not possible. You know, the old stories that play in our head, and they quite often stop us from trying new things. And it feels to me as though having a mini experiment rather than a whole life change could give you a better chance of quieting that inner critic, of sort of, you know, getting them to get out of the front seat and hanging onto the steering wheel and put them in the back seat. Do you find that that's something that has happened with people who have got a noisy inner critic, that calms that critic down, the fact that it's a mini experiment, not a whole life change?
Absolutely, it does. It quietens down the inner critic. It helps them to have an adventure rather than look for kind of a success. So it really helps, for people internally to get out of their own way. But it also, I think, really helps in terms of your environment. So well-meaning friends and family will say all sorts of unhelpful things to us when we're making a transition or trying something new. Before my first singing gig, I kid you not, and sorry, Mum, but my mum said, "Are you sure you should be doing this?" Really? And she had to wait till some of her friends had seen me sing live before she came along. I think she was that terrified. So look, and she loves me. She's, so well-meaning people can say really unhelpful things. And I think an experiment also helps to calm them down and to be less judgmental and to be curious alongside you. So
that's a great point. I think of if I was going to be going and doing something completely different. I'm thinking of my own kids. My son's just started university. If he came back and said, "Look, I want to become a punk rocker," right? And that's going to be my lifelong purpose. I might have a bit of a freak out. But if he came back and said, "I'm just going to try, this punk rock scene. I'm going to have a mini experiment just for 12 weeks and see how it feels," I could probably be a bit calmer.
Exactly. And I think I'm finding with a lot of clients, especially the ones who are wanting to do something out of the ordinary, that is a barrier, really, their environment barrier. So if we can in psychology, and there's a family system theory, if we can calm the system, if we can calm the people around us, then actually that makes life a lot easier for us as well.
Oh, for sure. Now, what part do you think understanding our strengths plays in sort of helping us choose a mini experiment, or move in a new direction, start a new chapter? How aware do we need to be of our strengths? Does this play an important role, or is this sort of we sideline that because we are trying something new? What do you think? Because I know strengths is a big part of your work, helping people understand what are their internal resources and their gifts and strengths.
So that's a great question. It's interesting. I think because when I work with people, before we pick our mini experiments, we have dived deeply into their strengths. So both the client and I are really clear on what their natural strengths are and how they serve them well and how they don't serve them well. So more often than not, the mini experiments are going to match up pretty closely to those strengths, and it gives people confidence. And hey, yeah, actually this is a good thing for me to do because it matches my strengths. I'll actually find some ease and flow in it, and I'll actually be energized by aspects of this. So I guess that's the part I come from. But interestingly, I think you could absolutely go either way, whether you want to match them up to your strengths or even investigate your strengths before trying a mini experiment. But I would highly recommend you getting to know them, because the more you can match up a mini experiment or a career move to your strengths, as I said, like the more energized you're going to be, the more productive you're going to be, and you will find some flow and ease in those aspects of those tasks.
That makes sense. And I'd like to just dig around the subject for a moment, because certainly something that I've seen often is that women who are moving into their next chapters often downplay their strengths, or because, and this is a natural, we've heard this a lot, it comes naturally to me, therefore I don't value it. People can find it difficult to charge for what it is that they do, because it almost feels like I'm obliged to do it. It comes naturally. It's easy. Why would people pay for this? Like, I have a friend who she has one of those interior design minds. Like, I'm not gifted in that area. I need help. But she can walk into a room and just know what would enhance that room, but finds it difficult. It's a challenge to actually charge for that gift. So how do we go about identifying and claiming our strengths? I mean, I know there's lots of systems, but what have you found is for someone sitting there and going, well, okay, I'm good at this and this, but that's just surface level stuff. Like, it's not so much the skills that we have, it's more of our character sometimes, I think. What do you think here, Nikki?
Yeah, well, there are two ways to get to know your strengths, and ideally you do both, but clearly starting with one is highly beneficial. And in the show notes, we can put, I've got a free strengths kit, so we can put that in the show notes as well, which will help people to get to know their strengths. And in that kit, I recommend either just journaling once a day or once a week about things that energize you and things that drain you. Alternatively, there's an amazing tool called the Strengths Finder 2.0 that's only $15 US, and it gives you a 4 or 5 page report of individualized descriptors of your true strengths, of your top 5 strengths. And now they don't cut and paste those descriptions, they are highly individualized to you. And I think that report really helps people to understand, yes, I might see these strengths as normal and undervalue them, but wow, when I read a 5 page report on how amazing I am, I actually start to believe that maybe there's some worth and value to these strengths, and also gives you language. So then you can actually go back and articulate to a future boss or a future client what your true strengths are. So, and there's a lot of nuance in strengths, so I highly recommend starting, because it's something that you can really grow your understanding of over time. And I recommend to clients just spending 10 minutes a week on looking at their strengths or their strengths report, getting to know it inside out, and also figuring out, which ones they want to dial up or dial down so that they feel energized.
I think that's a great contrast to see what drains you and what energizes you, because you could have a strength, but you don't necessarily want to be utilizing it in your business or in your everyday, because just because you're good at it doesn't mean you have to do it. But conversely, being aware of what your strengths are and designing the delivery of your services, if you're in a business mind, around that. So for example, one of the things that I adore is having wholehearted conversations. I'm a speaker and a listener, and so running a podcast makes perfect sense. It's a strength. And so that's why I've brought it into my business. So I think it's a really good idea to, as you said, to put value on your strengths and not just to discount them. So we'll definitely pop those 2 resources in there. But I was also interested when you said we want to know, with our strengths, to get clear on what serves us well and not so well. And my little brain went, how can a strength not serve us? Could you expand on that for me, Dana?
Yeah, absolutely. So with our strengths, we're looking at having them in a sweet spot. So where it serves us well and they're energizing. When actually, if you think about a weakness, it has a corresponding strength. So for example, one of my strengths is empathy, but for many years, it probably served as a weakness at times. So when in some of my earlier jobs in the mental health sector and as an organisational psychologist, I was dialing my empathy up to the nth degree and using it and thinking I was so clever. But I was being drained because I was overplaying it. So, for example, let's see, in the mental health, so actually that job was way too I was way too sensitive for that role in the mental health sector, working in a psychosocial rehab program, being around clients all day long, because I am empathic. I certainly learnt to dial it down over time, but actually it didn't serve me well overall. And it probably served me well 50% of the time and not so well 50% of the time, because I got so worried for those clients because they were sometimes in an acute or recovering from acute state. I just simply worried about them too much. So I found for empathy to serve me well, I actually need to work with clients who are functioning reasonably well, but want to take it, to a higher degree. So they're functioning reasonably well in life and in work, but they're wanting more. They're wanting life to have more meaning, more flexibility, more joy, and I can take them there. And that way my empathy does serve me well, because I do have a sixth sense and I can sense their feelings and read between the lines, but I don't get drained because I don't need to worry about them as much as if they were with having mental health issues.
That is such a brilliant example. Thank you so much for sharing that, because that makes it clear that sometimes a strength can be a weakness, and that can be environmentally induced. So I think what we're saying here is that the self-awareness is such a vital part of this journey that we're taking. Like spending the time to understand how you tick and what feels good and what doesn't feel so good. I think it's much easier for us to decide what we want when we're aware of what we don't want or what isn't working for us. Because I think quite often we can get stuck in the, well, what am I here for? You can get tied up in those big, what's the meaning of life type contemplations. But if we dial that down to the here and now, and as you did with such a degree of understanding how the gift of empathy that you have, the strength that you have, where is it best utilized so it serves you just as much as it serves your clients or your customers or your employers. I think that's incredible self-awareness. That's making a big impact. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. And I think that one thing I want to add is, honestly, when you get to know your strengths, it gives you permission to shape your work life to suit you and also to serve others. So that's often what people tell me. That's like, oh, now I always wanted to do that or change that, or I always felt like I was, the square peg in the round hole. And the strengths understanding gives you permission to own that and actually make changes, because you're born with these strengths. The likelihood of someone else having your combination of strengths is 1 in 33 million. And we want to respect them. We want to value them, and we want your role to match as closely to them as not. And if you're sitting there thinking work is draining, is it me or the job? What's going on? When you look at your strengths, you're bound to notice that perhaps only 2 out of 5 of your strengths are even being used. So yeah, it's really helpful information. I recommend people jump on it.
Oh, that's wonderful. We'll make sure those are in the show notes. So as we come full circle in this conversation, I think that was an amazing statistic to consider. When we often talk about how no one's got your life experience. There can be so many people who, for example, are doing career coaching, but nobody has the combination of experiences that you've had that have molded you into the type of service provider that you are today. And so you just brought that home with that, what are the chances of someone having the same combination of strengths and experiences as you? Well, it's 1 in 32 million. So I reckon that puts us in pretty good stead to start to really consciously create what we want our next chapters to look like, playing to our strengths, being aware of our weaknesses, and crafting. A lot of women listening are wanting to or currently have their own businesses, and we have utter permission, especially if we're conducting a mini experiment, to craft that and have that look exactly how we want it to, playing to those strengths. So yeah, that's just been a really enlightening conversation, Nikki. It really has.
Fantastic. Happy to be here.
So how can we find more of you in the world? If our listeners want to go and take the strengths test that you were talking about, and I believe you've also got a pretty cool mini experiment kit that we can get our hands on as well. Could you tell us about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So my website is Nikki Smith, that's nikkismith.net.au, and there you'll be able to find those free resources, but we'll also put the specific links in the show notes. So the specific link to your strengths guide and the link to the mini experiment kit will be in the show notes as well. And on the website, you'll also get, there'll be information about my podcast, which is Dream Life Best Fit Role with Nikki Smith. That's Dream Life Best Fit Role with Nikki Smith, where I interview people who have transitioned from being an employee to being another employee, or being an employee to a business owner. And we talk about the mini experiments and also how they use their strengths now in their current Dream Life Best Fit role. So looking behind the scenes at those transitions and what served them well to get where they are today.
Oh, that sounds brilliant. I'll make sure that all those links are in there so that we can go and explore Nikki World a lot further. That's great. Well, thank you so much for your time, my darling. I really appreciate it. Is there any last comments or thoughts that you'd like to leave with someone who is sitting on that edge of their next chapter of how to take that first leap?
I invite you to create your first mini experiment. And if you're feeling, anxious or nervous, and make it a micro one, make it a 1 hour micro experiment, and try and get a friend involved, either doing their own or one with you, because I know it makes an immense amount of difference to be doing this kind of exploring with someone in your network doing it as well. And look for that before, during and after feeling, and report in to Angela and myself on what it is and what you thought of it.
That sounds like a great idea. Thank you again, Nikki.
Thanks, Angela. That was fun.
Excellent. And for everyone who's listening, thank you for exploring this concept of mini experiments here with us today. I hope, like me, you've got little popcorn ideas that are popping in your head of all those things, or maybe even just that one thing that you've always thought about, you've always almost fantasized or dreamed about actually doing, but that biting off the entire thing just seemed too big. Well, now you've got the solution. Go and conduct a mini experiment. You have our full permission to play to your strengths, to even just try something that you're not too sure about. We're not committing fully here. We're just giving ourselves permission to play, to get curious. And then, as Nikki so importantly said, to check in with yourself. How are you feeling before, during, and after? And look for that evidence. Be a scientist of your own life and see where it may lead you to, because who knows what will unfold in your next chapter if you give yourself the chance to get curious and explore. So thanks again for spending your time here. This is Angela Raspers saying, see you again really soon. Take care. Thanks for listening to the Your Next Chapter podcast. If you've enjoyed this episode, please let me know. Pop over to angelaraspers.com to subscribe to the show and leave a review. And whilst you're there, you can also enjoy valuable free resources, including show notes and downloads, along with the Next Chapter community, where you can connect with other wholehearted women on the same journey as you. We'd love to welcome and support you as your next chapter unfolds. See you next time.